Mindie Kniss is a high-end coach and creator of the Heart Path Retreat Series and Core Coach Training Academy. Her diverse background includes working in the wilderness as an adventure trip guide and in corporate America at a Fortune 100 company. Mindie is the recipient of the prestigious Global Health Fellowship in Nairobi, Kenya, for her humanitarian work in developing countries. She holds an MFA in creative writing and is an author of the book, The Heart of Consciousness. And today we welcome Mindie to talk about following your heart. Mindie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Seven. Thanks so much for having me here.
No problem. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. I know that you are probably busy, you were traveling, you've been speaking, you've been doing all these amazing things, and I'm kind of in the same boat actually. Today I had like 5 or 6 interviews back to back to back. So you asked me actually before we even started recording if I knew what it was like outside, and I had to look out the window because I had no clue.
Haven't actually been outside yet. That happens a lot at our house, so I get it.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great segue into following what you really want to do is sometimes you have to spend days inside because you really love what you're trying to build or what you're trying to move towards. And, it means a day or two out of the sun. And sometimes you have to take a break and walk outside and kind of smell the roses and say, it's kind of nice out here when I take a break.
Yeah, and it's also about really understanding what works for you personally. I'll give you an example. Between my husband and I, he's very extroverted, and if he were to spend all his time at home and not get out and see his friends every now and again, he would go crazy. Me, on the other hand, I'm a super crazy introvert. And so I actually am more motivated and more energized by spending my time kind of in quiet, alone, in solitude. So it really comes down to what works best for you, and then knowing that and honoring that and saying, okay, well, I know I need to get out. And granted, I also need to get out of the house too. I'm not saying
Sure.
that I have to spend every day inside, but it's really about understanding yourself and your own energies.
And this is something that, I've kind of been on a path for the last year where I've really focused in on this. So I'm kind of excited to just see where the chat goes today. I felt that for the longest time, I wasn't necessarily doing what I was supposed to do. And I put quotes around that because there really is nothing that we are supposed to do. It's more of, we should follow our happiness and follow what we really want. And so I kind of had this pressure on me the way I was raised to, you grow up, you go to college, you get a degree, you get a job, you hold your job for 30 years, you build a family, you save for retirement, and that's just your life and that's how it is. And so I kind of had this moment where I questioned what was going on in my life when I quit my job because I was working a 9 to 5 for Apple. And, try telling that to your Jewish mother, hey, I quit my job, I'm starting a
At Apple.
company. Yeah. And I had this journey, and we've been documenting it with our Year of Purpose podcast. And so I'm really excited to have you here for this summit and talking about when people are lost and at that point where they don't know what to do, where do we even start? Because, as you know, we can get this paralysis of just being afraid to even start to move anywhere.
Yeah, I think the very first thing is to begin to pay attention to what I call the nudge. And the nudge is, you can call it the universe or some higher power, whatever it is for you, that is urging you towards something different. When I was working in corporate America, and I had a great job. It was a very well-paying job. I had awesome friends there. The job was not necessarily too stressful by any means, and had my house and car and all this stuff. And it was really great. I should have been happy with all of that. But this nudge kept just, even it started as a subtle whisper and then it got louder and louder. Like I was miserable there by the end, which was unfortunate that it took me so long to realize it. But I couldn't get myself around the idea of, oh, I need to leave all this and then do something completely unknown. And what's that going to look like? So it's one, paying attention to the nudge and saying, okay, maybe I need to start asking questions or figuring out what it is that I do want to do. And I love that you ask, where do we begin? Because I work with a lot of coaches that they would say, or I should say want to be coaches. And they're like, I don't know where to start, where to begin. What do I do? And so the very first thing that I did, and I would recommend this to almost anybody, even if you already are kind of on your path, it can be helpful to kind of clarify where you're headed, is to get out a piece of paper and don't do this on your computer. You actually have to write it down with a pen or a pencil or markers or whatever you like.
Those things that you used back in
Those
K
way
through
back in
12.
history, I know, right? So, well, I don't know about you, but I use them all the way through college. But you get out a piece of paper and you're going to create three different columns. And the first two are very standard in terms of what people would typically say. Oh, you just figure out what your skill sets are. Like you said, you're good at video, but am I passionate about video? I don't know. So you would write down video in your skill sets. Anything that you're naturally talented at, that goes on the list. Even if it's baking or roller skating or something that you couldn't have any idea how that would impact a career, write it down. The second column is, what are you passionate about? What do you actually like to do? What are the things that jazz you when you wake up in the morning? What would you be excited to go to work and work on? Those are those things. And a lot of people would say, oh, just merge the two together and that's your career. However, I think there's a huge piece missing if you just do that. So the third column that I would recommend you write down is, what are the needs of the world that resonate with you? Obviously, there are tons of needs of the world. You know, the people need to save the dolphins and the children and illiteracy and everything else that's going on out there. But what are the ones that pull your heartstrings? Which are the ones that really call you to want to make a difference in the world? And if you take those needs and look at how your skills and passions can fit into them and look for the puzzle piece that is the kind of connecting point or the linchpin between all three of those, that's going to be the way that you should proceed. For me, I didn't really know what that looked like because I was like, I love wilderness and camping and leading trips, and I love coaching and counseling, and I love books and writing and all these things. So how in the heck am I going to create a career that can do all three or all of those different things, various passions? And what I've done is I've created this high-end coaching practice that also leads retreats in Sedona, Arizona. So we get the wilderness and the hiking and all that stuff, the connection to Mother Nature in there. And I'm a writer, so I can combine all of those. And the need that I'm focusing on is just very much like you, Zephan, is figuring out what you're here to do. You know, what is the important work that only you have the ability, the skill, the passion, and that desire for? And how can we get you motivated and working toward that thing? So that for me was really, that's what I did. And that's what I recommend all my clients do, is create that 3-column list and then work on sorting out how those can fit together.
And you mentioned that you're a writer. Did you ever feel that you kind of had this story in your head of what you thought life was going to be like, and you found that that story was almost incorrect? Like, there was this story of what you had, and then there was this story of like the dream life of where you wanted to be. And was that the tool that you used to kind of connect the two, or take a piece from here and take a piece from here and kind of swap them around?
Sort of, but if I, back in when I was a kid, I've always thought about being a writer. I always have had this passion for books. And if you would have asked me 20 years ago, I would have thought, yeah, I'll be a writer that probably lives alone and lives on some mountaintop or something, way off in seclusion, and just writes and puts out this brilliant stuff to the world. Well, now nothing like that is happening. I'm married, first of all, which I wasn't necessarily planning on doing ever. And that was a great surprise in my life.
You don't regret it whatsoever.
Oh, it's awesome. It's fantastic. I mean, it's better than I could have imagined.
Yeah.
And so that's great. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is a big, it's a suburb of Phoenix, but it's a relatively, there's a lot going on here. It's a busy area. And so, yeah, it's very different than I would have imagined myself. And yet it's better than I thought it could have been. So that's the key, is people plan out a lot of different things. One of the other things I did when I was looking at becoming a coach and leaving corporate America was I created this fake schedule for myself. Now, I had 0 clients at the time. Nobody even knew who I was or what I was wanting to do. I didn't have a website, nothing. And yet I put on my, quote, weekly schedule these different names of potential clients. There was Mary and John and Bob. Now, these were not real people, but they were the people that I wanted. And I wanted to create my week how I would like it to be. For instance, I'll take Wednesdays off and I'll do this on this other day. And Mondays I'll go climb mountains or whatever it was. And my schedule never once in the last 8 years since I started my coaching practice, never once has it actually looked like that. But it keeps progressing in terms of getting better all the time. So that's the key is you can plan things and have goals and dreams and whatever, but not having the attachment to them. Because if you're so attached to just that, then you just get that instead of something potentially even more amazing.
Right. It's kind of like saying, if we're at a baseball game and we're just trying to hit a double so we can bring one of our guys back into
Right.
home plate, why not go for the grand slam? I mean, you could get even
Yeah.
more points on the board and, potentially win the game. And so that's something that I think, I've done. I think we've all done, and we've been a victim of that, is we don't shoot high enough and we don't realize that, like, if we had just taken it one step further, there could be something even greater than what we were even aiming for in the first place. And so that's a really great takeaway, both for me and for everybody listening, I think. Let me ask you this. So, you mentioned that you had a marriage, and that's awesome. I mean, hey, everybody wants to be there, right? What do you do when life throws a turn at you that you didn't quite expect? So like, obviously you had this idea of what you thought things would be like, and now it kind of changes a little bit. So it's like waking up tomorrow morning and you see that schedule where you thought Bob was at 10 and Sue was at
Right.
5 p.m., but they're not anymore.
Yeah. Really what it comes down to is going with the flow and being willing to receive the best that life will offer you. If I would have stuck to my thing, I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time when I met my husband, and he was living in Chicago. And I was very much career focused. I wasn't even interested. I thought I was meeting him in a business context as a networking thing, and he was not thinking that. He was thinking of more of a dating thing. But had no thoughts about that because I just wasn't. I didn't care. Like I wasn't looking for that, and yet life presented me this opportunity, this guy, this relationship, and if I would have said no, I'm working on my plan, like that would have been the most ridiculous thing that I could have said. I would have missed out on so much opportunity, so much growth, especially growth, because I have learned sometimes the hard way that relationships are the best personal growth program you could ever get. You are called to the table to be your greatest and true self if you have a really quality partner, that is. And I would hope that all of our listeners do. It's extraordinary. And having a plan is only a plan. That doesn't mean that it needs to be the reality. It can be a great goal. And I'm all for dreaming big. I'm all for doing the impossible, and setting that as your goal. And yet life often has something different planned for you. One of my favorite quotes is by a guy named Ed Townley. He's a reverend with the Unity Church. And he says, the good is the enemy of the best. And what he means by that is that, you could be going along with good things in life. Like I had what I thought to be a good thing going with the start of my career. And I was living in Portland, which I love that city, all these great things. However, what was offered me was this whole other experience. And if I would have stuck with what was just good, I would have been negating the best thing coming into my life. So the good is the enemy of the best. It's just a really simple way to remember that even if it's just good, well, there might be something even better for you.
It reminds me of, and I'm sure you've probably heard this story, but essentially, I'll probably butcher the way it was told, but I think this guy was like sailing, and for whatever reason, he's without a boat and finds himself floating in the middle of the ocean. And, he says, all right, God, I could use some help here.
Yes.
And a fishing boat comes along, and he's like,
Yep.
no, God will save me. And the boat goes
Yep.
away. And then, like, another guy comes along, he's like, no, God will save me. And eventually, he drowns. And
Why didn't you save me?
yeah, and essentially gets up to heaven. He's like, why did you save me? He's like, well, I sent that boat. I sent the this. I sent that. And so, just taking a moment to stop and see what life is handing us, because if we close ourselves off to that, you never know what it could turn into. Yeah, it could be something disappointing. Yes, it could be something that's hurtful. But I'd like to think that most of the time it's not.
But even that's a great point, because even when it is disappointing or hurtful, my belief system is that it's still for your ultimate good. You for whatever reason, needed to learn or experience just that subtle thing that you got from that disappointment or that hurt in order to do the next thing. You know, that life is this progression of events and experiences, and we need to grow through them. So some of them are going to suck. There's no doubt about that. But it's looking at the ones even that suck and not just jumping over and saying, oh, it's all for my, greatness. No, it sucks. Like, be in that suckiness, but also have that higher vision of, I'm gaining something from this. I am gleaning something from this experience, because I think that's always the case.
Yeah, and that's something that when I share, so I do have a story for a later time that goes much longer, but essentially at 13, I was diagnosed with bipolar manic depression. I was suicidal. I had panic attacks and all sorts of lovely labels and, a cocktail of medicine to go along with it.
Sure.
And at that point in time, I thought it was the end. I thought it was the darkest thing I could experience. And now, many years later, I mean, we're talking easily 9 or 10 years ago when this all went down, I almost see it as a gift, because I feel like it gave me, it's hard to put it into words, but I think I got more out of it as far as life skills and where to go from here on out, that it allows me to feel like there's a little bit more here. There's a bigger reason of why I'm here and what I'm supposed to do. And anyone else will look at that and say, well, that sucked. I mean, who would want to go through that? And I wouldn't volunteer ever to go through that again.
Right.
But I think that it really puts you in a much better place further down the road to be able to look back and say, wow, look at how far I've come, but B, look at what the human body is capable of. And so we talk a lot about, I almost like to think of it as the metaphysical. I know that you studied theology, and so we could talk about religious beliefs behind how our lives work. Is there any scientific or biological reason as to why we should be following, our true passions? I know that there's all sorts of chemicals and chain reactions in our brains that go off when we're doing good things and we feel good. But is there a science behind why we should follow these things?
Absolutely. And you can see I'm like getting excited just to talk about this. This is what I did my whole dissertation on, the intelligence of the heart. And that was actually in metaphysics. So I've studied the religious aspect, the metaphysical aspect, and pretty much everything in between. So I love this stuff. The scientific backing. I'll tell you about an experiment, and that will kind of showcase what I'm talking about. The researchers, there's research going on all around the world about heart intelligence and looking at the heart not just as this organ that pumps blood and, filters the blood through the body, but as this intelligent, conscious entity or organ. And one of the experiments that they did was they hooked up people to an EEG and an EKG and all these different nodes all over their body to register basically everything, all their different body responses. And they would show people on a computer screen in front of them different images. Now, every few seconds, a different image would come up on the screen. And about 3/4 of the images were something normal. It would be like a glass or a car or just something that wasn't used to create an emotional response. Now, the other quarter of those images were something that were designed to create an emotional response. It would be either a snake that was ready to strike or maybe a bloodied corpse laying out on the street. So there's, often this reaction to those types of images. Now, this was completely randomized by the computer. So neither the people running the experiment or the experimentees knew which image was going to come on the screen. Now, what they were able to find is that 4.7 seconds before one of those emotional images would come onto the screen, there was a physiological response in the body. So they're like, holy cow, this intuition thing might be real, because there's nothing, like, it hadn't even happened yet. And yet our body was already, reacting. And it wouldn't necessarily even be a physical response, because it started as just a node on the experimenters on their little machinery, but then it would travel up to the consciousness, and then we would see the thing and have this reaction. Now, they were able to trace the source of that first knowing, and guess where it was? It was in the heart.
Wow.
So often people think, oh, the intuition comes in through the head. They look at the chakra system and they think that it comes in through there and then it maybe travels through the body. Well, maybe that's not the case, because now these scientific experiments are showing that the source of that intuition was actually the heart, that then communicates up to the brain, that then alerts the rest of the body. So if you are thinking, should I follow my heart? Yes. Yes. And there is scientific proof for that. Now, often people say, well, what if it's not something that I can even recognize? Or how do I listen to my heart? Or how do I know what my heart is saying? And I would say, use your emotions. You said it earlier, actually, Zephan. It was following what makes you feel happy, following what makes you feel good, because that's the emotional idea. And I don't mean feeling good as in this moment only. Like we're just looking at total gratification and we're going to do a bunch of drugs and eat a bunch of nasty food and, have sex and whatever else people would be instantaneously gratified by. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this greater sense of ultimate high level fulfillment, at your higher self. What's going to be the most fulfilling thing for you to do? Because that feels better than almost anything. And it definitely feels better than all those instant gratification things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really neat. So the heart somehow already knows what it wants, maybe even if it's just a few seconds before the brain figures it out. And I can't believe that science actually backs that up. I mean, that's something
It's awesome,
that
right?
it's awesome, and I guess it's almost like mind exploding, because to think that an organ, just something that in our body we have come to know as, this piece of biological matter that just kind of keeps our body running, actually is somehow magically tied into emotion and feeling and intuition.
Yeah, it is. I love that. Mind exploding. It is. I run this event called Heart Path every year, and that's my wilderness retreat. And we spend a lot of time looking at all the science of the heart. And I've had people come out of there and they were like, this, they'll say, I had a paradigm shift. I have a whole new way to think about life, because it's not just here that you're thinking anymore.
Yeah.
It's this holistic way of thinking, and that changes everything. That changes complete your perspective on everything. And let me tell you a little bit more about why it's important to follow that, as opposed to just get stuck in your head where you're going to question all these different things and get frustrated or paralyzed and not actually take a first step. Well, the heart is also the source of courage. The word courage is from the French word cœur, which means heart. So if you think about that as like this essence of courage within you, all the fears, all the insecurities, all the crap, that's up here. So if you can go underneath that stuff, I tell a story on stage sometimes where I talk about my brother and sister and I. We used to travel to North Carolina every single summer to spend a couple weeks at the ocean. And we were coming from Chicago, so the ocean was like this big thing far away. We drove there, so it was this huge, family road trip, and we'd go to the ocean. And often we'd get crashed over by the waves as we were trying to make our way out into the ocean. But we quickly learned that if you dove underneath the wave, it would crash over the top of you, but not impact where you were, so then you could continue to swim out farther. It's kind of the same thing. If you look at the heart, if you just dive underneath all the mind chatter, the fears, the insecurities, all that stuff, you can just get underneath, and it's a much smoother road than trying to go through all those crashing waves if you're up here.
And now I'd imagine that road is a little bit harder to stay on, though, just because being in the right mindset, and there's a path to get to that road, right? Of a lot of obstacles and learning and self-discovery. And then once you get to that road, I'd imagine it makes things much easier, but you still probably have a couple turns here and there. Are there any things that we should be incorporating into our life every day, such as maybe some mindfulness exercises or things like that, that will allow us to stay closer to that path as easily as possible?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, because that's true. There are so many distractions and things, and even cultural norms that come into our lives, even our biology. Our default is to pay attention to fear. That was a good thing way back in the day when there were saber-toothed tigers chasing us. We had to be really focused on the stuff that could kill us. Nowadays, it's not so helpful. It ends, it just keeps us back. It holds us back, and it, creates this paralysis of, I want to do this, but I'm too afraid, or I don't know what to do. So the idea of a daily practice is brilliant. And one of the things that I would recommend, they talk about in heart science, they talk about this element of coherence. And coherence, it's very clear. It's as if I was talking. If I'm speaking to you and you can understand what I'm saying, I'm speaking coherently. But if I were to start, mumbling, you're like, what the heck is Mindie talking about? I would be speaking incoherently, right? Well, the body does the same thing. It's a physiological response, and they can actually measure, to the like zero point zero 0.01 hertz of the exact dynamic that they're measuring. What it is that they're measuring is not necessarily your heart rate, but the time in between. It's called HRV, or heart rate variability. So it's the space in between the heartbeats. And if that, you can create this nice 0.1 hertz of the flow of that. It's this beautiful sine wave, very smooth. And what does that feel like? It feels good. It feels like stress has left the building. You're relaxed, you're calm, you're in your empowered state. And to get to that place, one of the easiest ways to go about it is to focus on something that you're grateful for. And I don't just mean, I have a client that she emailed me a while back, and we were working on some of this stuff. And she goes, this gratitude shit isn't working. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can swear on this program.
Yeah, go for it.
Perfect. She said, this gratitude shit isn't working. And I said, well, if you're looking at it like that, it's not going to work. If you're literally just saying, okay, what are 3 things you're grateful for, and keeping it up here and saying, oh, well, I'm grateful for my husband, I'm grateful for my house, I'm great, whatever, that's not going to work. But what I'm talking about is the actual feeling of gratitude, letting it sink down into the heart, into the chest cavity. And the way that I describe gratitude often is this feeling of expansiveness. If you think of a time in your life when you have been the most grateful, where something was just so powerfully, almost overwhelming to you in terms of the gratitude, go back there, get that feeling, and that does work. That never doesn't work. So if you get to that, that can automatically start to calm down your nervous system and spread neurotransmitters and feel-good chemicals all throughout the body, and that will get you closer to being in coherence. And then everything's going to be a lot easier from that point forward.
It's so funny to hear you talk about, going back to that place, because I know exactly where that moment was for me.
Nice.
And I can pull up all of the emotions, and I see it, playing on a big screen, because ironically, it was after I had produced a 118-page script into a feature-length film as a college student with a $1,000 budget.
Awesome.
So, seeing that idea come to life on the big screen, I mean, I remember that clear as if it were yesterday. So I think that's a great exercise for everyone to do.
Actually, that's what I would recommend everybody do, is get one thing, one experience in your life that you can always pull up like that. Because there are going to be times where it's a little bit harder, where stuff's going on and it's not feeling so good. And if you have at least that one thing that you can remember and say, oh yeah, okay, that's what gratitude felt like. Cool. How do I get back there? Just let me think about that for a few minutes. That can change everything.
That's excellent. And I would love for you to share what's the link to your website so people can check out, if they want to go to this retreat series, or, just check out more of how they could work with you, on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thanks for asking. My website is mindiekniss.com. So it's MINDIE and then KNISS.com. And my Facebook page, I'm also pretty active on that, so they can touch base there. And I'd be happy to hear from any of your viewers.
That's awesome. And I'm sure I'd love to follow up with you and maybe chat at some point in the future. I'm sure this could go on, and I know we had some things in common as far as you studying theology, and I was telling you a little bit about where my name came from.
Yep.
So there's some cool things there. I'd love to catch up with you some other time, but it's been great to spend time with you today, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with everyone listening in.
You're so welcome. It's been my pleasure.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Evan.